Most preppers assume cold is a discomfort. In collapse, cold is a physics problem, and physics does not negotiate. Warmth is not a feeling. It is a measurement of energy stored inside a failing biological machine. When infrastructure dies, when fuel lines dry, when wind cuts through ruined structures, the human body becomes a leaking container bleeding heat into an infinite reservoir. Collapse strips away illusions first, the illusion that clothing alone protects you, the illusion that movement guarantees warmth, the illusion that fire solves everything. These ideas were built in a world where heat was cheap and constant, where walls were engineered and calories were abundant. Remove those pillars, and the environment reclaims dominance instantly. The mind will lie to you long before the cold does. People believe they can tough out freezing nights. They don't understand heat loss curves. They don't realize how quickly thermal deficit compounds once convection and moisture take over. They don't see their body as a furnace with limited fuel, burning faster under stress, burning even faster when energy intake collapses. In real collapses, Bosnia, Ukraine, Siberian evacuations, people didn't freeze because temperatures were extreme. They froze because they misunderstood heat. They underestimated how quickly body temperature drifts downward when shelter, food, and mobility degrade in sequence. Cold kills in silence, not in storms, not in blizzards. It kills in the quiet hours, when movement stops, when sweat cools, when the last layer of insulation becomes saturated with air too cold to hold. And in those hours, every prepper learns the same truth. Physics does not care who is prepared, only who understands. Cold is not a sensation. It is a transfer of energy from your body to the environment through four mechanisms that never stop working, never slow, never show mercy. Conduction steals heat the moment your body contacts anything denser than air, soil, concrete, metal, wet fabric. In collapse, people sleep on floors, hide in abandoned structures, rest on debris. Every surface becomes a heat sink. Convection accelerates the drain. Moving air strips the warm boundary layer off your skin and clothing, resetting the gradient again and again. Even a mild breeze can double heat loss. Wind is not weather. Wind is a weapon. Radiation is constant. Your body emits infrared energy in every direction. In a stable home with insulated walls, that radiation reflects back. In ruin, in open shelters, in improvised lean-tos, the body radiates into empty space. Nothing returns. Evaporation is the fastest killer. Sweat, rain, melted snow, all convert liquid to vapor by consuming your heat, not the air's. The moment your clothing becomes damp, the rate of cooling spikes with mathematical precision. This is why soldiers froze in the Ardennes while still moving, why refugees on the Balkan routes collapsed even above freezing, why civilians in Ukrainian blackouts layered incorrectly and slipped into hypothermia indoors. Every collapse environment compounds these mechanisms. Buildings lose insulation. Windows shatter. Roofs breathe cold air. Winds funnel through broken corridors. Moisture saturates clothing because there is no power to dry anything. Without energy input, fuel, calories, shelter mass, the body enters thermal half-life, losing temperature in predictable intervals. A 2-degree drop slows cognition. A 4-degree drop weakens fine motor control. At 6 degrees, judgment fractures. At 8, consciousness fractures with it. People think hypothermia begins with shivering. It begins with physics. The moment heat loss exceeds heat production, the countdown starts. No drama, no signal, no warning. Your body is a 37-degree system in a world trying to pull it to equilibrium. Collapse only accelerates the pull. Heat moves outward, always outward, until nothing remains to give. The human body is a furnace built on chemical combustion. Every heartbeat, every breath, every contraction is fueled by calories broken down into heat. In a stable world, this furnace runs effortlessly because food flows without interruption. Oxygen is abundant and the environment is controlled. But collapse erases those assumptions. Without steady caloric input, the furnace drops output. Without shelter and insulation, heat leaks faster than the body can produce it. Preppers talk about resilience, but biology is mechanical. When intake falls, output falls. When output falls, temperature follows. The body prioritizes survival through metabolic triage. Core organs receive heat first: heart, lungs, brain. Extremities are cut off early. Vasoconstriction starves the limbs to save the torso, slowing blood flow, numbing fingers, stiffening joints. Fine motor skills die before strength does, which is why people in early hypothermia fumble zippers, drop tools, miss fire weapons, fail at tasks that would normally be instinctive. As the core cools, the body shifts from shivering thermogenesis to muscular silence. Shivering consumes calories rapidly. When fuel drops too low, the furnace can no longer afford to shake itself warm. The shaking stops. People often mistake this stillness for improvement. It is the point where the furnace begins shutting down. Fatigue arrives early, heavy, unearned. A simple walk feels like ascent. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles refuse commands. Cold rewires the brain. Decision cycles lengthen. Risk assessments degrade. People wander from shelter. They remove clothing. In paradoxical undressing, they lie down to rest. Cognitive frostbite always precedes physical collapse, and hunger accelerates everything. Without fuel, the body cannot maintain thermal pressure against the environment. Even mild cold becomes lethal when caloric reserves drop below functional threshold. At 35°C core temperature, reasoning fractures. At 34°C, coordination slips. At 33°C, survival choices become impossible to execute even if understood. The furnace was never meant to operate alone. Civilization wrapped it in heated rooms, dry clothing, predictable meals, invisible systems that kept the flame stable. Collapse tears those systems away in hours, and when they disappear, the human furnace is exposed for what it truly is: a fragile, energy-dependent engine fighting a losing thermodynamic war. Without fuel, without shelter, without control, the flame dims long before the mind realizes death has begun. Shelter is not a structure. Shelter is a physics device designed to trap heat faster than the environment steals it. Most preppers confuse walls with protection, forgetting that cold ignores barriers that fail to interrupt conduction, convection, and radiation. A tent, a cabin, a vehicle. None of them guarantee survival unless they create a heat-positive environment, meaning the interior retains more energy than the occupant loses. In collapse, most shelters fail this equation instantly. Cracked windows leak convective currents. Thin walls radiate heat outward. Moisture condenses on cold surfaces, saturating fabric and wood, turning insulation into a sponge that drains warmth instead of storing it. True shelter begins with air control. Still air insulates, moving air kills. Historical winter fighters understood this intuitively. Finnish soldiers in the Winter War built low, dense shelters packed with snow walls because snow traps air pockets, stopping convection. Chechen fighters fortified mountain refuges using layered materials: wood, felt, earth, each slowing heat transfer differently. They weren't seeking comfort. They were building thermal resistance. Modern preppers rely on commercial tents designed for convenience, not survival. Thin nylon bleeds heat. Aluminum poles conduct cold directly into fabric. Ventilation ports designed for mild climates become death funnels in sub-zero collapse environments. Every structural gap becomes a thermal bridge. Nails, screws, metal frames, exposed beams all conduct heat outward with silent efficiency. Even the ground beneath you absorbs warmth unless insulated with multiple layers of dry material. People underestimate the Earth's appetite for heat. Lying directly on soil or concrete can drop core temperature faster than open air. Rooftops and abandoned apartments offer height but no insulation. Empty buildings are cold chambers, radiating internal heat outward through windows, floors, and steel. A shelter succeeds only when moisture is controlled. Vapor from breath, sweat, and melted snow accumulates and freezes, forming frost layers that reflect cold back into the space. Without constant airflow management and heat cycling, the interior becomes a freezer. Survivors in besieged Sarajevo learn to rotate between heating bursts and ventilation pulses, not for comfort, but to prevent ice buildup from suffocating indoor warmth. Heat-positive shelter is measurable. If one candle cannot raise temperature even slightly in a sealed space, the structure is too porous. If breath forms immediate crystals, the air volume is too large for the occupant's heat output. If walls feel cold to the touch, radiation is draining energy faster than fire can replenish it. Collapse removes engineered heating systems, exposing how poorly modern materials defend against winter. In the end, shelter is not about walls overhead. It is about controlling the movement of heat. In collapse, those who survive are not the ones who find shelter, but the ones who understand how to make a dead structure breathe warmth again. Fire is not warmth. Fire is an energy conversion event, and in collapse, most people misunderstand its physics. They treat flames as comfort, not computation. Every spark releases heat only in proportion to the fuel's mass, density, and moisture content. Every second of burn is an equation. Energy produced versus energy lost to the environment. In an open system, a pit, a barrel, a collapsed building corner, the majority of heat never reaches the body. It escapes upward, carried by convection, scattered by wind, radiated into empty space. Preppers romanticize campfires because they have never depended on one to survive a night at 10 degrees C with no backup fuel. The difference between cinematic fire and survival fire is measured in joules, not aesthetics. Moist wood steals heat instead of producing it. Before flame can form, water must evaporate, consuming energy from the fire itself. This is why inexperienced survivors in Bosnia and Donbass burned through entire piles of debris and remained cold. The fire burned, but the heat's output was too low to shift body temperature or warm shelter mass. A proper survival fire requires dry fuel, dense structure, and controlled oxygen flow. Too little oxygen suffocates combustion, too much accelerates burn rate, wasting fuel with no thermal gain. Collapse strips access to seasoned wood, forcing people to burn trash, furniture, green branches, all low-yield, high-smoke fuels that poison lungs before they warm skin. Heat radiation is directional. Flames emit infrared energy strongest at close range and perpendicular angles. Sit too far, and convection steals everything. Sit too close, and sweat forms, triggering evaporative cooling that kills faster than the fire warms. Preppers rarely understand this paradox. Overheating beside a fire is often the first step toward hypothermia when you pull away. Wet clothing, even slightly damp, converts your body into a heat donor, bleeding energy far faster than the fire can replace it. Fuel demand is not intuitive. To maintain survivable shelter heat for 8 hours, a human-sized space requires a constant conversion of biomass equal to tens of thousands of kilojoules. That means mass, large mass, consumed steadily. In collapse, scavenging that mass burns calories, exposes you to wind, and risks injury. Every trip outside is a thermal gamble. This is why seasoned winter fighters built rocket stoves, Dakota pits, and enclosed burners, devices that trap heat, restrict airflow, and force combustion to radiate inward instead of outward. Primitive open fires are light sources, signal tools, morale boosters, but they are catastrophically inefficient heaters. Smoke is another enemy. Indoor fires without proper draft systems saturate shelters with particulates, reducing oxygen availability and impairing judgment. Sleep becomes shallow. Headaches blur reasoning. Carbon monoxide infiltrates silently, replacing oxygen in the bloodstream while the victim feels only fatigue. Many die with flames still burning because they forgot that fire consumes air as aggressively as it consumes wood. Fire is not a friend. Fire is a machine. Feed it wrong, and it betrays you. Run it inefficiently, and it drains your resources. Ignore its physics, and it blinds you with light while offering no heat. In collapse, those who survive are not those who can ignite flame, but those who understand how to force fire to obey thermodynamic discipline. Water kills faster in cold than thirst ever will. Evaporation is the most efficient heat extractor in nature, and the human body fuels the process with its own thermal reserve. A single layer of damp clothing can multiply heat loss to lethal levels, even when air temperature hovers just above freezing. Most preppers underestimate this because they imagine cold as an external force. In reality, the body is the one doing the work, converting liquid to vapor, burning calories, surrendering warmth molecule by molecule. Sweat is not a byproduct. It is a thermal debt that must be repaid instantly. In collapse, repayment is impossible. Movement becomes a trap. Walk too fast, haul too much, panic under stress, and sweat forms even in sub-zero air. That sweat cools the skin the moment exertion stops. Refugees in Chechnya collapsed after short climbs not because of exhaustion, but because evaporative cooling stripped their heat before rest began. Wet boots and fingers, wet gloves and hands, wet base layers and lives. Cotton becomes a death sentence. It absorbs moisture, holds it against the skin, and accelerates conductive loss. Wool delays the process but cannot stop it once saturation reaches the fibers. Synthetic layers help, but only if the survivor understands the rhythm of heat, exertion, venting, insulation, stillness. Mistime the sequence once, and the body enters freefall. Water from the environment is equally merciless. Snow melts against fabric. Rain seeps through seams. Frost condenses on collars and cuffs. Every gram of absorbed moisture must be evaporated, and evaporation demands energy. Your energy. This is why lightly soaked clothing feels colder than fully wet gear. The transition phase, liquid to vapor, is the highest theft. Once the body's thermal output cannot keep pace, shivering begins, then slows, then stops as starvation of heat overtakes the furnace. Electrolytes shift, muscles misfire, reaction time drops. A person who was alert minutes ago becomes sluggish, glass-eyed, detached from reality. The colder the body gets, the more mistakes compound, and each mistake creates more moisture, spilled water, fallen snow, forced breathing, uncontrolled sweat. Cold punishes ignorance, but moisture punishes arrogance. No one outruns evaporative loss. No one negotiates with water. It is not the storm that freezes people. It is the thin layer of damp trapped between skin and fabric, consuming their heat quietly, methodically, with perfect thermodynamic efficiency. Collapse is not defined by violence or hunger. Collapse is defined by the moment human bodies are forced to operate under raw thermodynamics with no artificial buffers. Modern civilization hides the truth. Warmth is not normal. Warmth is purchased through constant energy expenditure. Power grids, fuel pipelines, insulated infrastructures, climate-controlled interiors. Remove those networks and the environment reclaims equilibrium. Everything trends toward the ambient temperature. Entropy is the law. Comfort was the exception. A human at 37 degrees C is an energy anomaly. The universe wants to pull that temperature downward until equilibrium is reached. In a functioning society, heat pumps, furnaces, electricity, transportation, and calories fight that downward pull effortlessly. In collapse, that fight becomes personal. You become the heater. You become the energy source. And the moment your output cannot exceed your losses, the system, your body, slides toward environmental parity. Cold wins not through force, but through mathematics. Entropy governs every decision. A ruined building vents heat through shattered windows. Metal frames become conduits, draining warmth into open air. Fuel stocks shrink because acquisition burns calories that must be replaced but cannot. Firewood becomes heavier because of moisture, demanding more work, generating more sweat, stealing more heat. Every attempt to create warmth introduces new avenues for heat loss. There is no stabilization, only delay. Survivors in Eastern European blackouts learn that even indoor cold becomes lethal once entropy overtakes the structure. A concrete apartment at 0 degrees C is a thermal predator, slow, silent, patient. Collapse strips away artificial energy inputs that kept thermodynamic reality at bay. When the grid dies, heaters stop. When transport halts, fuel stops. When logistics fail, caloric intake collapses. And when caloric intake collapses, the human furnace loses the ability to maintain internal order. Entropy does not simply describe cold. It describes mental decline, motor decay, impaired judgment. The colder the world becomes, the more chaotic human thought becomes. Cold erodes discipline, then coordination, then identity. Survivors who believed they were strong freeze, not because of weakness, but because the math outran their will. In collapse, every survivor becomes a temporary heat generator in a universe demanding balance. The environment always collects its payment. The only variable is how long you can delay the inevitable. Entropy is undefeated. Survival in cold is not improvisation. It is procedure, repeatable, disciplined, measurable. The body loses heat through predictable mechanisms, so every action must counter those mechanisms with equal predictability. Clothing is not fashion. It is a layered system engineered to manage airflow, moisture, and heat retention. The base layer must stay dry at all costs. Its only job is moisture extraction. The insulation layer traps still air, storing heat that the furnace produces. The outer barrier stops wind from stealing that stored warmth. Fail one layer, and the other two lose function instantly. Movement must follow the same discipline. Exert only enough to maintain blood flow, never enough to wet the base layer. When heat rises in the body, vent immediately. Open zippers, loosen cuffs, release steam. The moment exertion slows, seal everything before the sweat cools. This rhythm is mechanical. Generate heat, release excess, trap the remainder. Shelter requires the same operational mindset. Reduce air volume to a size the human furnace can influence. Add insulation mass, even improvised. Blankets, clothing piles, cardboard, leaves, anything that traps air. Raise the sleeping platform off the ground with multiple layers. Pre-warm the shelter using a controlled burn. Then seal airflow once moisture escapes. Keep a dry zone for clothing rotation. Every breath introduces vapor. Every movement stirs convection. Nothing inside a shelter is neutral. Everything either protects heat or steals it. Calories must be treated as thermal ammunition. As the temperature drops, the body increases metabolic output just to maintain baseline function. Food intake must rise proportionally. Fats burn slow and hot. Carbohydrates burn fast and sharp. The cold demands both. A survivor who rationed food for longevity dies sooner than one who eats for heat stability. Without fuel, shivering becomes ineffective. Cognition falters and decision cycles collapse. Water intake must remain steady. Dehydration thickens blood, slows circulation, and accelerates cooling. Heat management continues even in stillness. Rotate limbs, flex fingers, tense muscles in controlled bursts to maintain microcirculation. Breathe through the nose to warm air before it enters the lungs. Avoid exposing the face, neck, and wrists, high-flow zones where blood surrenders heat rapidly. If gear becomes damp, change immediately. If no replacements exist, remove layers systematically to vent moisture before resealing. Everything becomes calculation. Every minute, every movement, every breath influences the furnace. Mistakes compound. Efficiency compounds faster. Cold does not reward strength, it rewards systems. In collapse, the survivors are not the ones who resist the cold. They are the ones who learn to operate like a machine in a world that measures failure in degrees, not intentions. Cold does not negotiate. It does not slow, pity, hesitate, or forgive. It is a constant equation operating with perfect indifference. Your heat versus the world's appetite for it. Once collapse removes the artificial systems that kept that equation in your favor. Every human becomes exposed to the same law. Temperature differential dictates survival. A body at 37 degrees C placed into an environment far below that value begins losing heat instantly, predictably, relentlessly. No mindset, no optimism, no preparation myth can alter the physics. When heat loss exceeds heat production, the outcome is fixed. Most deaths in cold are not dramatic. They are quiet. They begin with small errors, a damp layer, a missed meal, a cracked window, a moment of exertion that generates sweat. The body falls behind the thermal curve and never catches up. By the time confusion sets in, by the time clumsiness blurs fine movements, by the time the survivor thinks of adjusting clothing or rebuilding fire, the deficit is already fatal. Hypothermia feels peaceful only because the brain is shutting down, not because the danger has passed. Collapse environments amplify this decline. No infrastructure, no fuel flow, no redundancy. The cold becomes a predator, not through aggression, but through mathematical certainty. Survival is never about toughness, it is about understanding the physics long before the body reaches the point of no return. Cold kills those who underestimate it, and it spares only the ones who treat every calorie, every breath, every layer, every decision as part of a thermodynamic battle. Collapse strips away illusions and leaves a single truth behind. The environment always wins against those who do not know how to fight it.